Hello, friends. I'm Jem Fadling, and this is the Unhurried Living podcast, where we inspire you to rest deeper, live fuller, and lead better. My guest today is Dr. Alison Cook, therapist and host of the top-ranked Best of You podcast. We'll be talking about finding emotional freedom, learning to see through the haze of conflicted feelings, and moving forward in your life with confidence. Widely recognized as an expert at the intersection of faith and psychology, Dr. Alison Cook is a trusted guide that will share with us a groundbreaking 3-step process to find the freedom you crave. When you're tangled up inside, it's hard to find clarity, yet so many of us guilt trip or gaslight ourselves instead of working our way through complicated feelings. This jumbled up knot of thoughts and feelings is a cry for gentle care and patient attention, but most of us haven't been given the tools required to unravel it. Well, change starts when you finally stop beating yourself up for the way you feel and say, you know what? I do feel this way, and I can finally do something about it. Enjoy my conversation with Dr. Alison Cook. Well, Dr. Alison Cook, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh my goodness. Thanks for having me back. I just so remember the last time we spoke with such fondness and warmth, and I'm really grateful for more time with you.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I did feel a little bit of a kindred spirit in there. So we're going to dive right into your book. Of course, it's I Shouldn't Feel This Way. And we're going to dig into, I hope, a little in depth, your 3-step process. But before we even go there, I wanted to talk about the topic of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
How important it is to be someone who is self-aware, having some self-knowledge. Because I find that that's a big part of the conversation, right? You kind of have to know what's going on so you can work with what is. But I'm wondering, talk to me a little bit about self-knowledge and then maybe help me understand, because I realize not everybody goes there. You know, what keeps us from stepping into even a knowledge of ourselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the most helpful tool for self-awareness for me has been the language of parts, which is actually the topic of my first book.
Right.
Because, what does it mean to become self-aware? That's a huge concept. I mean, the concept of self is almost as lofty as thinking about God.
Right.
It's where do I start? And so to think about, for me, this work of turning my attention inward to attuning to the parts of myself. Some people think about it more like attuning to my nervous system, attuning to my physical being. That can be really helpful for people. To me, it's, attuning to what emotions I'm feeling and what parts of me are doing. And so self-awareness, I think, is a practice. I think it's a spiritual practice akin to growing in God awareness. The risk of sounding heretical, right? Because the two go hand in hand, right? Being aware of my own inner states. I'm cold, or from anything like I'm cold to I'm angry or I'm shut down. That awareness is our starting place to conversation with God.
Yeah. Well, what do you think then, if it is a really good starting place, I know that some of us feel blocked in that way, or maybe even just not knowledgeable. What keeps us?
I think it's hard to look inside, especially if we're not used to it. I think about when I talked about, and I shouldn't feel this way, the first step being name what's hard. Well, it's easy to name what's hard about someone else or about a relationship or about something that's annoying us or something it's easy to name what's hard. That's wrong. That hurts. I don't like that. That's the external naming what's hard. It's really hard to shift that for inwardly and go, well, how does it make me feel? Right? I feel rejected. I feel lonely. I feel devastated. I feel frustrated. That's another deeper layer that initially is like, I don't want to look at that. It's easier, I think, for us intuitively to name what's outside of us. It's harder to really look at the inner work. I do think it's what Jesus invites us into. And it is, I think, the path toward true healing is to it doesn't mean, Jem, and I really tried to point this out in the book, it doesn't mean we don't also need to look at the circumstances in our lives. But we have to start. I say in the book, name what's hard. Start with yourself.
Yeah.
I'm feeling even the hard stuff, like I'm feeling resentful, and maybe there's good reason for that. And the first step is to really own it and look at it and take it out.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you already bringing up the idea of naming. We may as well just go there right now because I was hoping you would feel free. I mean, it's in the subtitle. So I figured it's not a secret just to talk about the 3 steps. So I'm wondering, could you walk us through? We've got name, frame, and brave.
Yeah.
I would love it if you could just spend a few minutes on each one. What is the process? What happens inside of those?
Yeah. And they sound simple.
Right.
And as I was unpacking them, I really believe each one is sort of a practice. And I liken it to learning to ride a bike. It's actually the practice of, you might think of it as a practice of emotional intelligence. It's the practice of learning to master this complicated machinery, this beautiful design God has given us. I do think it's our job. And so as a therapist, this is often what I'm helping other people do. I'm sure you relate to that in your work. I'm helping other people name their emotions, frame them, and then figure out how to take brave steps. But I do believe this is the work we can learn how to do with our own inner lives, right? This is part of growing in sanctification, healing, growing in becoming mature and whole and formed. And so I'm trying to, through these 3 steps, really kind of walk people, break down, right, these practices of how I learned to do this in my own life from being a very unaware person. I would say early on, very God aware, very self-aware. And that led me down some roads that were really unhealthy. And so having to learn how to attune to myself. So I kind of had to learn it the hard way. And that's what I'm trying to break down in this book. So naming what's hard is that first pivot from, here's what's going on. Or even, it might even be just, for me, sometimes it's noticing behavioral patterns. Like I just can't stop myself from working. That might be the first thing, that might be the first thing I notice. Naming, I'm compulsively working, I don't even know what the emotion is yet. So naming is that first pivot to self-awareness of what is happening here. What is happening here, right? And I kind of walk the reader through different ways of, again, practicing that. It's a practice. It's a muscle that you begin to learn. Just yesterday, I noticed I was very uptight, very tense, and I'm sure my family noticed it. And this practice of, in a very non-shaming way, just a subtle shift inside. I've been practicing this for a while of going, that's what's happening here. I'm uptight. I'm not going to shame myself for it. I can't fix it right away, but that is what's happening.
Yeah.
And it sounds simple, but it's kind of mind-blowing and revolutionary when you start to do it.
Oh, I've had that experience where when I finally found out inside myself what was really going on.
Yes.
And I said, one time my husband and I, this was way back when the podcast first started, we were setting up because we were going to have a conversation together. And I was nervous. And so I was getting perfectionistic, and then it was getting tense. And then it's your husband. So you're just, whatever. And we get a few minutes into this, it's getting more and more tense. And all of a sudden I just woke up inside somewhere. And I realized that I was afraid.
Yeah.
I was afraid of so many things. What if people don't like what we're saying? What if I look stupid? What if I sound stupid? And so then I stopped this because he's done some inner work as well. So we both understand. I'm like, wait a minute, I know what's happening. And I named it. I said, I'm actually afraid right now. And even just saying it out loud, I felt it fell off of me. Like my perfectionism went away. Like I didn't, it was just like, oh, I see. I'm just afraid. And so it's kind of super practical, isn't it?
Yes. And it is, when you begin to experience that, suddenly you realize, oh, it's wonderful to be able to name, I'm scared or I'm anxious. And your whole nervous system, it does relax. And I do think it's it's a little bit about what Jesus said when he said, the truth sets you free. It's what's true.
Yes.
This is the truth. There's no
Right.
shame in it. And even when you're feeling, I'll say to people, even when what you're feeling is kind of ugly and you're judging yourself, which is hence the name of the book, I shouldn't feel this way. This is
Right.
bad. But I do feel this way, right? I say that over and over in the book, but this is how I feel. And there's freedom in that. Again, and that's why there's 3 parts to this process, 3
Right.
steps. We're not
Right.
fixing it at this point. We're not judging it. We're just saying, this is what is. This is what's actually happening. And it's very freeing. And I do think it's a very spiritual practice because we shed the shame, we shed the guilt, and we align with God in that moment because we're telling the truth.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much. And I think I love it because I've experienced it so many times. The
Yeah.
actual felt bodily sensation
Yes.
of noticing something and naming it and having certain other parts just fall away on its own.
Yeah.
Then I'm
Yep.
left, I do have to obviously still do work then, right? Either it's an
Yes.
easy pivot. Like in that moment, it was quick. I just like, oh, I see what's going on. Let's move on. Let's record. But sometimes there's other more deep things. But I think that's another part of the conversation is, can we grow to be people who actually love transformation and are willing to kind of pay the price for what it takes to really change and grow? Right? Isn't
Yes.
that underneath this?
I think that's a really good way to put it. Are we willing? There's a cost to growth. And
Yeah.
once you get on the other side of it, you're like, oh, I don't want it any other way. But there is some resistance often at first because we have to look at ourselves. And that leads, like you said, it isn't the end of it. That leads to that second I call framing, right? Because that's that place in between the naming and the action. We don't know yet what it means. Like in your case, I love that example. I'm fearful. And that was it. That naming brought you the freedom and the relief. There are other situations where, maybe I think of anger sometimes, like I'm angry and I don't know why. And I don't know if I should be angry. I don't know if I'm the problem. I don't know if maybe someone else is the problem. And so that second step of framing is where we do that deeper work of reflection, of giving ourselves a minute to process, to reflect, to discern, what is this all about? What is the bigger truth here? And that can, depending on, especially on the front end of the work or a really hard, complicated circumstance, that can take more time. Sometimes it might take, in the instance I was saying yesterday where I was very uptight and I seemed very kind of on edge. And my husband said, you seem a little on edge. And I've gotten good at saying, I am, that's true. And I don't know why. Can I get back to you tomorrow? Right? Because I didn't know how to frame it in that moment. I didn't know and that's giving myself permission to take the time that I need to figure out, I don't know why I feel this way right now.
I'm wondering if you can help us. I know that obviously a therapist can help a lot, or even a spiritual director, someone who can listen well and help us learn how to frame. If you didn't have that person in your life right now, is there a way to learn on your own how to frame things?
Yeah. So in the chapter on framing, I call it, there's two tools. One is creating what is your very own, what I call a place in between, and learning yourself. Is it for you? Like I'm having emotions. I kind of get what they are. I'm having a struggle over here. I kind of get what it is. I've begun to name it and I don't know what to do yet, which is the braving. So what's my place in between? Am I someone who needs to take some deep breaths? Am I someone who needs a good 24 to 48 hours with just some space to myself? Am I someone who, during that place in between, needs to call a friend? And I kind of know who that friend is that's going to be a good sounding board for me and honor the place where I am. So that's one thing. It's kind of learning yourself, learning your own needs when you're trying to untangle the knots, right, of these different emotions. And then the acronym that I use for FRAME is kind of a list of questions to begin to ask yourself in those moments. So let's say you do take a walk, which is often what I do. What are the facts? Sort of the self-inquiry. What happened? What what were the circumstances? This is what I did this morning about being on edge last night. Here are all the different things that were converging. I had too much to do. What was the straw that broke the camel's back? Was that straw actually someone doing something wrong? Or was it that I overcommitted? Right? It kind of beginning to self-inquiry. So that's the facts, and then the reflecting, and then the assessing. When has this happened in the past? Typically, what are my patterns? Right? What is going on usually in the past? And then kind of what are the messages, the mental messages I'm telling myself about this? So you're doing this. So I take you through a series, and every chapter I kind of take you through each of these steps and different questions in different circumstances to begin this process, whether you do it in a journal or you do it with a friend, where we all can begin, even without a therapist, to kind of mind our minds. I talk about it in the book. Notice what's happening, what's going on, and we're in that differentiated place. We're not in the emotion. The emotions are in front of us, and we're able to, I call them truth pieces. It's like a puzzle, kind of lay out the facts in front of us, right? It's a beautiful skill to be able to kind of get really kind of discerning about your own inner life. And it takes some practice, but you really can learn it. And you begin to kind of arrive like at that aha moment, like, well, you know what? I was just tired. A couple of things didn't go my way.
Right.
Or, I share in the book, I use the example. There's some cases where you come home and the house is a mess, and you're frustrated and you're irritated and agitated or whatever. And, sometimes I was just tired and this is abnormal and it just was a bad moment. Sometimes you frame it and you go, you know what? Every single day for the past 6 months, I've been coming home. I've been asking for help, and my family is completely disrespecting me. That is the truth of what's happening here. I'm actually irritated because there's an issue, right? So that's where that would be a different braving step. Or sometimes the third category is sometimes as we reflect and we frame, we realize, you know what? I am coming home every day. I'm just using this example of the messy dishes. And you know what? I've never asked for help. And so why don't I ask for help? What is inside of me? I get frustrated. I won't say anything. So that would be a different braving step. So see, in framing, we're trying to get at the truth. What's the deepest, truthiest truth underneath
Yes.
all of that bundle of emotions? And sometimes it can take you to very different braving steps.
I love the truthiest truth. That's so good. There's so many dynamics that are bubbling up in my thought process as you're saying this, because I think of people, you're further down a journey here, obviously, of a lot of self-knowledge and a lot of inner work and a lot of transformation. And some people, though, are maybe stuck back with not even believing they have the agency to speak up if they even could do what you did. Like, no one's helping me, and but they don't even know how to ask for help. Yeah. So that's a real place for people. I'm wondering, again, I'm always thinking of the people who might need just that extra nudge to make it their way into what you're saying. Like if they don't feel like they have the agency, what would they do?
Oh, golly, I think I would start with naming that.
Yeah.
Right. The naming of, that feels overwhelmed. I would never be able to do that. That's a feeling. I feel like that I could never do that. I just have that's what's true. That's where I am. And so start there. That feels overwhelming to me, or I don't know that I could have even the wherewithal within me to get to that point of agency. Wow. And just again, in a non-shaming way, isn't that interesting? And then maybe I always love to go to the what ifs. What if that were possible? What might be the next step? And in that case, I would really focus in, if you look at the book, on that naming. The naming is really the gateway. I think it's 90% of it. When we begin to really name honestly without shame, we open up those windows of our soul to the Holy Spirit and to the truth. And that's where from there, the growth and the healing and all the things flow.
I love what you're saying, because what you're saying is we can accept ourselves wherever we are.
Yes.
We can only just actually start from wherever we are. And so the questions that we can ask, or the discernment we can do, can be from the point where I am. And
Yes.
for anyone at any point along that journey, then
Yes.
it's still the same thing. Do you have the wherewithal to move forward because you want to be whole?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And
So
so that's
whatever.
starting where you are, just to say,
Yeah.
okay, if I want to move forward, I have to start right where I am. You know,
Yeah. I
that's the
love
first
that so
step.
much. Oh, I sort of learned that in my spiritual direction training. I feel like it's such a gift. That ministry is such a beautiful ministry because it is so gracious and invitational. And
Yeah.
there's a kind of
Yes.
acceptance about it, as well as you honor and respect exactly where the person is. It is
Mhm.
not my job to push or pull or coerce. That's why you learn to listen
That's
well, to
right.
ask questions.
That's right.
But I just think that's a beautiful posture. But sometimes I don't do that to myself.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? It's
Exactly.
like I forget to not shame myself or guilt myself or
Exactly.
judge myself. And I'm like, okay, I don't need to do that. I could just acknowledge what's happening and maybe
Yeah. Yeah. Because
so
it's
yeah.
that's the beauty of that inner, and it's such a buzzword, but it is so powerful, that inner self acceptance of, oh my gosh, this is where I am.
Yeah.
It's not where I want to be, but it is where I am. This is
Totally.
where I will now start. It's
Yeah.
powerful.
I love it. There's a phrase that's been coming to my mind the last couple of weeks. Do you remember Chuck Swindoll from back in the day? He used to
You
be this
sure?
big
Yeah.
pastor. I don't know what he's up to these days, but I remember a sermon from way back. He said, "It is never too late to start doing what is right."
Mm, mm.
And I don't
Yeah,
know how
that's
that
good.
falls on other people's ears, but for me, that sounds like grace.
Yes.
It's never too late. So no matter what, if, oh no, now I'm naming it, but it's so what, all the things I've done. No, it's never too late to
Yep.
just see where you are, acknowledge where it is, see what you can do from
Yes.
here. And I think that becomes more and more true the older I get. Like, okay,
Yeah.
because now it is late. I mean, I've been alive for a
Yeah.
long time. So
If you're, I do a lot of hiking in the mountains, and you can get really lost really easily in the forest. Well, the first thing you have to do if you get lost is to anchor yourself where you are. It's not where you want to be. You want to find the way out, right? So you spend all your energy looking for the way out. That's how you get more lost. But
uh,
when you anchor yourself, oh, this is exactly where I am.
yeah,
This is the place that I am. You can begin to orient yourself from that starting place. So it
so
is,
good. Yeah.
yeah, it's really powerful.
Was there anything else you wanted to say about framing before we move to braving?
Um, no, I think it's probably in the book the hardest chapter for people to grasp, and the one
Yeah.
we like the least, because we want to get to the
Get to the do.
solution. But I think it's probably one of the most important, and maybe one of the most neglected, where we
Yeah.
don't believe in our own capacity to really, again, look at those truth pieces, and at least from our own perspective, be able to really see the the highest truth. A lot of time, one of the things I talk about is that two things are often true, right? That's kind of often the ultimate framing, which is, two things are true here. I feel this way, and I wish to be a good spouse or a good parent or a good friend, right? Or I feel this way about God, and I also wish to do right by you, God. That often what we arrive at the end of all the framing is this kind of these competing truths that exist side by side. And when we just take those out and look at them, it actually takes away all that confusion. We don't have to force fit into one or the others. Two things can be true, right? And from that place, we actually have a better, more stable place again to get to the braving, which is to find that way forward.
Well, let's move into that then.
Yeah.
How are we going to move forward?
Yeah. So the braving is, and this kind of came out of my own practice and my own, even some of my own frustrations, because I have this very therapeutic orientation of being in process, helping people. But I also am very pragmatic. I also am someone who let's what are we going to do? That part of me
Right.
also exists. So I wanted to honor that, right? Like, this isn't just about self knowledge. This is about knowing myself and then agency to take action. A lot of my people I've worked with, they're coming into process really complicated relationships, sometimes abusive relationships, sometimes toxic relationships. And so we're doing this work because I need to make sure that they're really clear internally before they take action. Because if you're just taking action because someone tells you to, the odds are you're going to go right back to the old patterns. And so the braving is that, okay, now what do we need to do, especially if it's a relational situation? So, but what I was going to end that saying is like, so what would happen is we do all this work and then the client would say, well, but now what do I do? And I think that's a valid question is what, and I don't want to always, well, why are you, I get that. And sometimes we need examples. So that's this third step is my nod to, yes, now let's talk about what are some of the options. So again, I use the acronym of BRAVE. The first one, the B, is boundaries. Is there a need for boundaries? Is there, if we've named and framed a relational challenge and we realize that this specific relationship, let's say with a parent who uses toxic strategies, is just constantly stirring up. And man, the more I look at it, it's like, this is the way I'm going to feel. And it's bleeding out into other areas of my life. This is what's true. I see that it's what's true. I'm going to need to now take some action steps to mitigate that harm. And those would be through boundaries, right? R is range, kind of increasing your range of coping. What are some different ways that I can develop to cope? There's A is assertiveness. Do I need to learn how to speak up on behalf of myself more? V is vitality. Do I need to bring more good things into my life? And then E is environment. Do I need to change certain things about my environment? So again, this comes out of my work of, it's not always just we got to go set a boundary. There's a range of braving steps. I break it down into, this is overly simplified, Jen, but it's often the braving step is in 3 categories. Am I going to fight for change? Am I going to leave the situation? Or am I going to suffer it wisely? And then and then that BRAVE acronym kind of gives you examples. And that can sound again, like, gosh, why would I want to suffer something wisely? But I kind of break that down for people. These are often the options before us. And I'm happy to break that down. But that's kind of what I'm trying to do with that braving is there's a range of options for us that we have a lot of agency. We can't change other people, but we have a lot of agency to make shifts, to make changes in lots of different ways that improve our own mental and emotional health.
Yeah, that's a beautiful part of this is that we do have choice. I think is what you're saying. We have choices.
Yeah.
And I would actually like you to go over those a little bit more. You said it basically sounded like fight, flight, and fawn. But I mean, in a way.
Except they're in a differentiated way.
Yes.
So I think when we think of fight, flight, or fawn, those are us reacting in the moment.
Yes.
When we've done the work of naming and framing, when we have agency, what that means is, I'm going to make an intentional decision. I'm going to proactively. And so fight for change is, you know what? So let's use the same example of a family situation where you come home every day and your family's left a mess throughout the kitchen, right? I'm going to fight for changes. I'm going to sit down with my family and have the hard conversation. I've never done that before. Yeah. And I'm scared and I'm going to do the work to figure out why that's hard for me. That would be fighting for change. Or in a relationship with a friend, this has been hurting me. Yeah. And I think it's valid. I don't think I'm being overly sensitive. And I'm going to fight for change. I'm going to bring this into the relationship. And so to fight for change, we're going to grow in our assertiveness muscles, right? We're going to grow in trying to, right? So that's what I mean by that. But it's a strategic, intentional decision. I'm going to try this. And it takes it takes courage. I'm going to try something different. The second one I'm going to leave is when we've named and framed and we're like, this is not healthy for me. I cannot function in this space any longer, in this group any longer, in this relationship any longer. In this work, there's something about this, as I've named my own inner experience, as I've framed it, I have to walk away from this, whatever it is. And that's also very brave, right? But when you put in the work on the front end, when you go to take that brave step, it's still hard, but it's like, I've thought this through. I know what's happening here, right? So that's the leave. And then but you're doing it again. It's not flight. It's not, I'm going to just disappear. It's a strategic, intentional choice that you might even communicate. I give a lot of scripts in the back of the book about how, especially if the situation is toxic, how to protect yourself. And again, different situations, you leave different situations in different ways, depending on the nature. Sometimes we leave healthy situations, sometimes we leave toxic situations. And then, the suffering it wisely. Sometimes people love that. And sometimes people are like, again, it is pivoting from that fawn, which is just, I'll just make it seem okay, to, oh, I've looked at the facts. Let's use the example of an aging parent. I've looked at the facts. This is really hard. And I cannot walk away from this. I'm or a co-parenting situation. Sometimes this happens in marriage. This part of this is really hard. I'm not going to pretend like it's not. I'm not going to gaslight myself. And also, I'm not going to leave. And it's not going to change. That's a valid choice in certain situations. It really is. And it's different for everybody. Sometimes it's valid to leave. Sometimes it's valid to stay. But when we suffer wisely, we say, I've looked at it. I'm not deceiving myself. I'm not pretending like it's something that it's not. And therefore, what you do is you equip yourself to mitigate harm. And again, I give a lot of examples. Maybe you use the buddy system and you're going to care for that person, but you're never going to be alone with that person. There are little things you can do to honor your internal decision. I can't leave this. I am going to stay. And therefore, this is what I need to do to take care of myself. So that's kind of what I mean by those.
Yeah, that's so good. All throughout what you're saying, I'm hearing there's grace, there's discernment.
Yes.
There's a growing confidence, to be able to make a decision. There's a lot of empowering stuff going on under all of this. Because you're the one that's going, oh, this is what's happening. And this may be why it's happening. This is what I'm going to do about it. That whole process is very empowering to my ear. I'm wondering if you could talk about a couple other sort of underlying things that go on with the whole thing. The first one would be the dreaded word, patience.
Oh, yeah.
Talk to us about patience, because even though we just talked about this for the last half hour and it just sounds like a lot of wonderful words, very understandable. And the book is amazing. You have to get it. I mean, all the things that Alison is saying, there's these boxes and there's these charts and there's these questions. And yet this really, really helpful unpack. All that to say, we've said some things, but this requires patience. And maybe another thing to put alongside with it, if you want to comment, is the idea of processing time. Like it takes, all of this would take time, and it depends on what the circumstances or who you are or what's going on. You talk to us about that?
Yeah, I like to think of that word patience. We tend to think about patience as being patience with others.
Yeah.
I like, what helps me with that is to think about, I need to be patient with the parts of myself. Because I'm going to get to a better solution if I take the time that every part of me needs to get on board. And it does take longer, but if I move too quickly, like I said, and I see this time and time again with clients, it's just like, I just want out of this relationship. I'm just going to break up with them, or I'm just going to, and then they go right back because parts of them weren't ready for that. They feel guilty afterward, or they feel scared, or they feel anxious, or the other person comes back and, they weren't, it's like an athlete needing to train your whole body so that you're ready to make that big decision or ready to take that brave step. And so I think you're being patient with the different parts of yourself. And yes, it can take longer, but as my co-author and I like to say, we talk about Boundaries for Your Soul. It's a slower way to get to where you want to be faster.
Yeah. So good. I mean, that's 100% our message, isn't it?
That's you. That's what you're about.
This is what we're saying.
It's a slower way to get to what you actually want faster. Right. And that's countercultural.
100%. It is. The air we're breathing is that something has to happen fast or now or yesterday.
Yes.
And right, the productivity, just the
Yep.
productivity that we're just forced into. But what if you could breathe for a minute and just, like you said, what if all my parts had the time and space to get on board with this and then we could move through?
And I would speak to how do I make time for, because I do believe this is a practice. I don't think that part of it has, it's to me, it's like exercise or eating. We take time to eat every day.
Yeah.
We take time to pray every day. You could find moments in your day. For me, in the busiest seasons of my life, when my kids were teenagers, and I felt like I was in the car all the time, driving them around.
Yeah.
I used that time, turn the radio off, turn the podcast off, and just pay attention to what's in my mind and what's in my heart. It doesn't have to be, I've got to take a day to go to a retreat. And, it can be journaling for 15 minutes every morning. You will start to blaze those new pathways of self-awareness of, oh, this is what's happening here. So yes, it takes commitment.
Yeah.
But I don't think it has to take a lot of time. It's a practice we develop.
I agree. I mean, I've even stopped myself for just a minute or two in the middle of the day. I mean, literally I have a home office, so my home office is upstairs. But if I run down for a lunch or something in the kitchen and I catch myself with my shoulders hunched or something's furrowed here or something's going on, you could take 2 minutes and just go, oh,
yeah,
what's going on?
Yes.
Just check in. And then go, oh, well, I guess I'm okay. I'm just getting my lunch right now. So you could drop your shoulders and just move into the day, right?
The body is another, that's one that's newer for me, but even just, oh, what if I released my shoulders? Okay. There's an awareness there of I'm holding tension,
It can be very fast. There's a great sentence you said in here. It might have been near the end of the framing, but it kind of led into the braving. You said brave actions flow from clear minds. Talk about that for a minute. I like that.
Yeah, I think that has been my own experience. As much as I want to rush to the solution, the more time I take and I get that inner clarity, that inner conviction of, oh, I'm pretty clear about how I'm seeing this. And even if I'm wrong, I know I put in the work and I'll be okay with that. That's when I can be brave. That's when I'm like, okay, let's go. Because there is always, being brave means making ourselves vulnerable. There's risk. There's risk the other person won't like it. There's risk of lots of different things. There's risk of, making a mistake. But the more work I've done on the front end, not to be perfect, but to be clear, to the best of my ability, this is what I think is true. And I say probably, so many times in the book, you take that brave step. You can always course correct. You take that brave step and you reach out and have that hard conversation, and that person comes back to you in a way that surprises you. Oh my goodness, I just got new information. Okay. But that ability to be brave in my experiences flows from that inner work of finding clarity.
Good. Again, that sounds like freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom to make the move. I love the idea of course correction. Again, I think I've said this at least twice since we've been talking, but you're offering us a lot of grace here.
Yeah.
Which I think is actually it's the good soil in which you can grow. You can't grow in perfectionism and judgment. It's just too much. And so what if we just eased up a bit? I just spoke with Andy Colbert this week. Your podcasts are coming out kind of near each other. And, she talked about try softer. We talk about unhurried living. And what I hear you saying is that you could be gracious to yourself as you make your way. And that's going to actually make it go. It may still be hard, but it will like grease the skids, so to speak, right?
Yes.
Movement.
Yes, we are all saying, I love that trio of kind of trying to say this message of that is the soil in which we grow. Exactly what you're saying. It's not shame. It's not self-criticism. Right. That adds tension to an already tense inner life, but that permission leads to freedom. And it is what actually, and often paradoxically, leads us to be brave in our real lives.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating to me that paradoxically, again, might be slower, but it gets us more to where we want to be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, maybe we could end here with kind of where you ended in the book. No spoilers here, but just the idea of hope. You leave us with,
Mm.
some hopefulness here.
Yeah, I think that to me, the hope is in. I do liken it to riding a bike. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm doing it. I know because here's the thing, Jem, you know this too. We're going to get knocked off again. Life is going to throw us its fair share of challenges, stressors, heartaches. That's just the part of the deal. We can't control that.
Right. Right.
But when I know how to ride the bike, and I know how to, and by that I mean when I know how this instrument that God has designed me with works, and I kind of understand the nuances of my own temperament, my own nervous system, and my own proclivities and my own tendencies. Right? It's like, okay, I I can manage. I can more than manage. I can, and because there's an exhilarating feel to riding a bike, right? It's like I'm going, I'm moving, I'm living, and oh my goodness, there's a pothole coming up. Okay, I know pretty well if I stay really grounded and I pay attention, I can steer myself right around that. And oh my gosh, that feels great. It's not that the pothole isn't going to show up. And
Right.
so that's to me the joy and the hope is there's not much. And I've had some hard stuff, and I'm looking out, I feel like God with me right now, saying, man, there's not much I think that could knock me off, right? I just, there's such a freedom in God, whatever comes my way, God forbid I don't want it to, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. I know you, I know me, we're good. And let's go. There's that sense of, and that allows you to enjoy the highs, and it allows you to, I actually heard, forgive me for this is going to be a very time relevant. I thought it was a really great saying. The quarterback of the Eagles, after he won the Super Bowl, he said it 3 times.
Yeah.
He said, God is bigger than my highest highs and my lowest lows. And he was saying that in the context of having won the Super Bowl and having lost. And I was like, that is exactly it. God is bigger than our highest highs and our lower lows. And there's so much hope in that. We're okay. We're okay. And that gives us that agency to go live our lives and go for it. Because if we do get knocked down, God is there. We're there. If we don't, that's going to be awesome too. So,
Yeah. Oh, I love that image. I mean, in my mind, bigger means it's like I have a place in here in this place instead of, because sometimes I think I've done this before. I don't know if others do it. God is somewhere else and I'm trying to reach him, but God is bigger means I'm within. That's the image.
totally.
I am within this
Yes.
big, massive, whatever, spacious
Yes.
God. And
Yes.
then I'm in here, and that's where the hope is, and I'm going to be okay. Because I've made it through this is what I say to myself sometimes when I'm whatever, nervous or afraid, or I have made it through every single thing that has happened in my life so far. And I have 61 years now of things that have happened, and not all of them were good. We can all make our list. But I have made it through. And not only did I make it through the best I could at the time with what I had, but I am now where I currently am thriving as best as I know how.
Exactly.
So, isn't that another thing you can say to yourself out loud?
And it's not just, that's where that transcendence piece comes in. I've been thinking a lot about that. It's not just, I know how to manage the instrument. It's like, this is exciting that there's something God designed us to work in partnership with him through all of this, that in and of itself is part of the joy of life. And I agree with you. It's not just that we make it through. It's that, oh my gosh, look at who I'm becoming out of both the bad and the good.
Yes. Yes. And it's usually the bad or the difficult that really forms you. You are deeply formed. That's just one of the things. I don't quite understand it, but I know it to be true because I've lived it. It's so true. But anyway, there's hope. We're ending on that idea of hope. Well, it's always, I say always, both times I've talked to you, Alison.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure to connect with you. I love your passion. And the book is great because, again, there's wisdom in there, but as you can tell from the conversation we've had, it's loaded with just grace. So I'm wondering, before we sign off here, can you tell us how you might, if people wanted to connect with you online, how would they find you?
Yeah. First, I just want to say I'm so grateful for your ministry and your work, Jem. I see you sometimes. I'm not online a ton, but I'll see you. And there's always that in my body, that invitation just from who you
Good.
are. So thank
Good.
you for what you do and all that you put out. And I really appreciate that there's just some really neat places, different places where we're all kind of trying to share this message.
Yes.
Yeah. I am probably the best place to find me is my podcast these days, which is The Best of You. You can go to my website, dralisoncook.com, to get that information. I send out a weekly email. I am on socials kind of sporadically. That I have found, as in my self-knowledge, is a place where I can very easily get sent sideways. So I work through a lot of my inner
I hear you. We have to have a conversation about that. I've had a hard time being on it this whole year, actually. And the last time I posted was probably early January, but it has felt very difficult for me to go into that space recently. Like, it's a combination of all the contempt, of course, and the battling, but also just all the things. There's all these ads and you're tempted by stuff. And it just feels like a little bit of a petri dish of unhealth. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. And for me, it's that I also know that's where you want to be a space of goodness there.
Yes.
And people find you there. And it's like, whoa, there's a big cost to be on it. To me, I am there. A lot of times I try to get around. I use like third party, meaning I'll post, but it's not really me, which also brings up stuff. I mean, it's me, but I do it through a third party. So I don't have to. And again, it just brings up all those complicated feelings of how do you navigate. That's part of navigating the digital age. But I say that to say I am on social media, but it's not the best place I enjoy interacting with folks, because it's just, it's fraught. I relate. It
is fraught. And I want to, there's a part of me that really wants to be in there, being good, doing good.
Yes.
But I've had to just take a little bit of a break to figure out what's going on in my heart and soul right now with that. So I'm in the middle of that, whatever.
Yes.
It's a small problem.
Yeah.
But anyway, so thank you again, Alison. Go get the book. If you're on YouTube, you can see it right here. I Shouldn't Feel This Way. There it is. So go get that. And thank you again so much.
Thanks, Em. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me on the Unhurried Living podcast. You can download free resources and learn more about us at unhurriedliving.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I'd love it if you'd share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. You'll also find many helpful links in the show notes so you can get to know us better, as well as our partner, Life Audio, and all of their other faith-centered podcasts. Remember, you're making your way forward one small, simple, and gracious step at a time.